Welcome to Confessions by Banana Ketchup. Childhood paranormal experience. So, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I lived in a home diagonal from with an elderly couple. We kids referred to her as the witch, which was not meant in a cruel way. She wasn't scary, but she read tarot cards and would have groups of strange people over. I came from a family of horror lovers from a probably too young age. My father introduced my brothers and I to 70s, 80s horror movies, much to my mother's dismay. The Exorcist, Evil Dead, Communion, Puppet Masters, Killer Clowns are the movies I grew up on. If you asked me as a child what I wanted to be when I was older, I'd reply a forensic pathologist for the FBI like Dana Scully. My love of paranormal led inevitably to my love of space. You watch Fire in the Sky and tell me you don't believe. My father and I would sit on our porch looking at stars. One summer night, when we were outside, a bright blue light caught my attention from the neighbor's house diagonal from ours. I look up, and in the second-story window on the right-hand side of the house, I see my neighbor's husband. And there is this incredible bright blue light behind him. He had both arms up at 90 degrees angles, so his forearms are sort of framing his head on either side. Then he began to move quickly side to side. It was almost like he was vibrating. I said to my dad, "Look, there's Rocky," pointing to the window. My father looked where I was pointing, froze for maybe 10 seconds, then quickly scooped me up and brought me inside. My mom could tell my dad was upset. My dad yelled at me to go to bed so he could talk to my mom. I went upstairs and cried because I was confused by what happened. I am, a daddy's girl and didn't understand how I made him upset. The next morning, I wake up and my mom and dad come talk to me in my room. My mom sat next to me and said, paraphrasing, "About last night. We didn't tell you guys because we didn't want to upset you, but Rocky passed away 2 weeks ago." I was dumbfounded. My dad sat quiet, just sort of nodding his head as I protested because of the night before. I honestly can't remember if he said at the time he saw him too. I don't remember anything beyond being told the man I'd seen was dead. I think it was such a shock, I blocked the rest of the conversation. Fast forward 20 years, and we are at the big family dinner celebrating my engagement. The condo steers inevitably to paranormal topics, as my family tells my fiancé about my creepy obsession as a kid. At one point, my father says, ghosts aren't real. In shock, I ask him, but what about Rocky? Both my parents' mouths drop open. My mom was saying she couldn't believe I remembered while I just stared at my dad. I asked him again and he admitted that he saw him too. Thank you NGF 2017, the author. Exceptionally sensitive. Forgive me now, but this will be pretty long. My grandpa and grandma moved up from Georgia to Ohio in 1960, and my grandpa was a military veteran with quite a bit of cash saved up to where he could build a home in a quiet suburban area. The neighborhood he built his home, where my mother grew up and eventually I would grow up in, was a cookie-cutter neighborhood, filled with probably the types of homes you'd pick from a Sears Roebuck's catalog. I, for one, knew of several homes around the area that was similar to one another, or at least had the same layout. The actual home we lived in was built in 1960, and from what we knew of the land, it wasn't anything special. No Native American burial grounds or anything like that. However, I do know how everything started for our home, and I'll tell you the experiences of not only myself, but of the experiences of my mother and family members, though I consider myself to be the primarily subject who has been exceptionally sensitive to these types of experiences. It started with 2 words, Ouija board. My mom, my uncle, who would later turn out to be a psychopath who had been shot in the head and survived, blown his own arm nearly clean off, and damn near killed his own sister. And my mom's cousin all decided that one day they would play with the Ouija board up in the attic. I'm unsure what transpired or what spoke to them during that game. All I know is that the board was never disposed or closed properly. They burned it and then threw it in the trash when it didn't burn. I can't tell you exactly how long this experience took to happen that I'm about to tell you took place since that game, but I, as well as you, can only assume. The first experience. The man in the hat. My mom's cousin, who we will call S, was sleeping in one of the 3 bedrooms in the home, when he woke up suddenly from feeling like someone was watching him. He looked towards the door, and in the doorway stood the figure of a tall man, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. He sat up in his bed and asked the figure if he could use the restroom, to which the figure nodded and stepped aside. S walked into the bathroom and locked the door. The next morning, my grandpa had to unlock the door, where they found S sleeping in the bathtub with the lights on. While I know this isn't very detailed, it isn't my experience and I can't really go into detail about something I wasn't there to personally witness. I have never gotten the chance to ask my uncle, second cousin, but I've always called him my uncle, about anything he witnessed, and I highly doubt he'd be willing to remember. Now, whether or not my mother's brother, we'll call him Psycho, experienced anything, it suffices to say that something had to have latched onto him to create the heinous monster he is today. Psycho has had a string of violent offenses, being into drugs and other seedy things, as well as recently attempted to murder his youngest sister, my aunt. The man hasn't ever stayed out of prison long enough for me to ever physically meet him. Yet, my mom says that when I was 3 years old, he tried to take me, with my mother's permission of course, into a car full of men up to the city, which my mother threatened that if he put me in the car, she'd murder him. Suffice to say, I've never laid eyes on the man, and I never wish to. I'm also not sure about what all my mother has experienced either. She's very religious now, in her twilight years, and really doesn't like anything pertaining to the occult or paranormal. Whether that's because of her experiences, I'll never know. I do remember a few stories that coincide with my own that I can tell you before I dive into my own. Second known experience. Laugh in the basement. One night, my mom was downstairs doing the laundry, and when I say night, I mean my mom was a nurse who worked night shift, so we are talking her noon was midnight. While my stepdad and I were asleep, she was doing her normal taking care of the house and our laundry. Suddenly, she heard a loud thud outside of the basement window right in front of her. She looked up, and the pale face of grinning man was staring at her, and when her heart skipped a beat, he began laughing, which her response was, that was enough basement time for that night. Another experience she had, which included myself, was phantom calling. My mom and I hang out a lot. She was my best friend when I was younger, and my biggest ally against an alcoholic stepdad, who after the years I've forgiven, but during my childhood I both hated him for how he treated me and my mom, and loved him because what little girl doesn't want to have a dad in her life? But as I said, I've moved on and love him as my dad now. So, one occasion, we were in the kitchen and my mom was doing the dishes and I was standing next to her. We were laughing and having a great time together while my stepdad was in the garage, his favorite drinking spot, when we both heard my stepdad's voice call out my mom's name, then my name, "Come here," which he would do on occasion to call both me or my mom to his man cave for some reason or another. My mom looked at me and said, "What does he want now?" I shrugged and said, "I don't know." and started walking towards the door that led to the garage. My mom opened the door, me on the landing in front of her, and asked my stepdad, who had his phone up to his ear and a cigarette in his other hand, and asked, "What did you need?" My stepdad turned and looked at us and said, "I didn't call you." Both my mom and I looked at each other and she asked, "You didn't call us from the garage?" He shook his head and said no. My mom excused us and she shut the door and we looked at each other. Her only response was, "Weird." It's late here, so I'll post a second part to these tales sometime soon. Thank you Witch Art, the author. And also thank you guys for watching this video. What do you guys think about these stories? Leave a comment down below. See you in the next video, and until then, please be safe.